Hello everyone, welcome back. We are continuing with Klal 2 of Ilchot L'Surei Lashon Hara of Sefer Chavetz Chaim, section 2. Now this section elaborates on the license which this Klal is devoted to elaborating on, the license of Apei Tlosa. Now this literally means in the Lashon Hara, in the presence of three. And it's based on the Gemara in Bava Basra 39a, where Rabba bar Rav Huna said, any matter stated in the presence of three listeners, be'apei tlasa or tlato in Aramaic means three. So in the presence of three listeners is not subject to the prohibition of Lashon Hara. Now this ruling, people commonly misinterpret as saying that one can speak Lashon Hara to three listeners, and one is broadly permitted to repeat Lashon Hara that was already said in the presence of three listeners. So, if Lashon Hara is related in the presence of three listeners, then you're allowed to say this Lashon Hara to someone else. But these are misinterpretations, and these are not actually true. And the Chavetz Chaim will devote this klal, this whole section, this whole klal, to elaborating on this license and correcting those misinterpretations. There are generally 5 approaches to this license: the approaches of Tosfos, Rambam, Rashi, Rashbam, and Rabbeinu Yonah. And the Chavetz Chaim will talk about all these different approaches in the ensuing in the ensuing sections. Now, what the Chavetz Chaim will say here is according to the opinion of Tosfos, to that Gemara in Bava Basra 39a. And the Chavetz Chaim says that for Ruvain to speak about Shimon in the presence of three listeners, this applies only to a matter that's not clearly derogatory. So it's something that can be misconstrued either as positive or negative. And it has 2 different interpretations. And it is known that generally such statements depend largely how the speaker, Reuven, expresses himself as he's relating the story. And Chazal permitted the saying of this statement in the presence of 3 listeners. And they base this license because they assume that since Reuven is relating this matter in the presence of 3 people, he certainly understands that this matter will eventually reach Shimon's ears, right? Shimon is the person that Ruvain is talking about. And, right, because people talk to each other and the matter is naturally passed along until it is eventually retold to Shimon. And therefore Ruvain will guard himself, and he will make sure not to speak anything overtly derogatory, and he will not say anything derogatory about Shimon. And therefore, in that case, since a person is more likely to have good intentions when saying something, the Chazal permitted the saying of this ambiguous statement in front of 3 people. So, for example, the Chavetz Chaim cites an example. Ruvain, a stranger in town, approached Shimon, who was standing in a crowd. "Excuse me," he says, "where can I find a warm meal at such a late hour of the night?" So Shimon said to him, "You should go straight to Levi's house. He always has food on the stove." Now Shimon's reply about Levi can be construed and understood in 2 different ways. Either Levi, he overindulges in eating, and therefore he always has something cooking, or Levi is a charitable person who always has food available for guests. So when Shimon says this statement in the presence of 3 people, it's obvious to Reuven that Shimon realizes that Levi will eventually hear about what he said. Therefore, Shimon will make sure not to speak in a manner that will convey a derogatory meaning. But however, if a person does mean to say something derogatory, and it's always you can always understand if someone is his intentions are in order to are derogatory or not by the way he presents the information. He can either present the information in a serious, he actually means it, in a permitted, not in a permitted, but you can always understand by the body language how he speaks, what kind of gestures he makes. And if a person, by judging from his gestures and the way he speaks, you can understand that he means the derogatory version, the negative version of the statement that can be misconstrued. So in this case, the food cooking on the stove means that this person is always overindulging in eating. The Chazal consider this completely derogatory, and they consider it avak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara. And it's forbidden to make such a statement even in the presence of 3 listeners. Now, avak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara, will be explained further in Klal 9, but clearly, by judging, since it's not outright lashon hara, it's not as bad as if the person is saying this in the presence of 1 person, because it is known that a person generally speaks, expresses himself differently in the presence of 3 than in the presence of 1, if he does so in private. Okay, thank you for listening. We will continue tomorrow with section 3.